Good afternoon. I'm Arunabha Ghosh. I'm the CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, which is India's leading climate and energy institution and among the 20 best climate think tanks in the world. Very delighted to be here to welcome you, along with our partners for this session, Agility, which is a global leader in supply chain services, infrastructure and innovation with 65,000 employees across 6 continents. The session we have today is called Harnessing Technology for Tomorrow's Energy. But if we unpack that session title, we actually ask ourselves 2 types of questions. One, with the technologies we have today for the energy transition, how could we deploy faster? What are the governance mechanisms needed to make sure that we're doing it responsibly and equitably? And the second question that arises is, with the technologies that are emerging on the horizon, are we designing them to be sustainable and to drive the sustainability agenda as well? Now think about it this way. My country, I come from India. India, over the last about 14, 15 years that we've been around as an institution, has very quickly become the world's 4th largest renewable energy market by deployed capacity. Over 150,000 megawatts of renewables, over 200,000 megawatts of non-fossil capacity. We have to go to about 500,000 megawatts of non-fossil capacity by the end of the decade. But one of the things we did was thought about where was the land, where are the population concentrations, where might there be water constraints, where there might be social conflicts against big infrastructure. And does that slow down or does that help us deploy renewables more responsibly? And we find that India alone has a potential, despite these constraints, of over 7,000 gigawatts of renewables. It's this kind of hyper-local assessment that is needed across the global south, which will drive at least 90% of global energy demand over the next couple of decades. But then we also think about the technologies that are emerging on the horizon. Of course, walk around Davos, and you'll hear about AI in pretty much every conversation. You hear about the demand for energy coming from AI, but you also hear about the potential leveraging AI and other emerging technologies to optimize our energy use better. Which way will we end up is determined in part how we design the technology, and in part how we experience and live it, and how we design the governance of these technologies. It's to debate on these issues that we have a stellar panel with us. We have Joanna Messing, who is the CEO of the Global Climate Fund. We have next to her Thomas Keeley, who's the founder and chief executive of Hyliion, which is also a company in which Agility has invested. After Thomas, we have Lars Lovarro, who's the vice president for strategy, insights, and scenarios at Shell International. And finally, we have J. Carl Ganter, the co-founder and director of Circle of Blue. We don't have only technologists on the stage here. We've got journalists, we've got analysts, we've got technologists, innovators, investors. We want to have this kind of a multidisciplinary conversation around the issue of harnessing technology in a responsible way to drive the energy transition forward. So let me start with you, Joanna. You have often talked about a double transition that is needed in energy. On one hand, driving renewables growth, on the other hand, pulling back from fossil energy. We know, at least on paper, renewables plus storage is outcompeting fossil infrastructure in many geographies, and yet the pace of deployment of clean energy infrastructure is not as fast as we need. What's holding it back? How do we get more investment to flow into geographies where the sun shines the most?
Absolutely, thank you, and thanks for this session today. I think it's really what you said, it's all about speed and scale. This transition is happening, but will it happen fast enough to meet climate and development goals is the main question. So there are several things, unfortunately, holding back this transition at speed and scale. Policies that are incentivizing and enabling transition, permitting in particular, is something that can take quite a long time and can be the difference between profit and not profitability. Profitability is another thing. Just because the economics work and the costs work does not necessarily mean that an individual project or company is going to be profitable, particularly when you layer on emerging economy risk, some of which is real, some of which is perceived, which makes the cost of capital for many of these projects prohibitively high, again, for speed and scale. Grid expansion and modernization is another area where I think there's actually quite a lot of space for technology to make sure that it is catching up and up to speed with the most, with the deployment of renewables that's required. And then going back to policy, PPAs and PPA reform is another major thing holding things back. However, even with all of these barriers, we see so much opportunity, in particularly around financial innovation, thinking about ways to reduce the risk of individual transactions through securitization or through bundling, through aggregation of deals, through the creation of new types of funds that are specifically organized to resource these, through the support of domestic financial institutions that are not carrying the currency risk or the emerging market risk. We also see a lot of opportunity to update the subsidies and policy reform to enable this transition. And finally, I would say there's a real opportunity around updating the modeling that we're using to assess the financial viability of these projects. A lot of times, the models are backwards looking, which look at the last 10, 20 years of performance rather than the next 10 to 20 years. When we layer in, we're going to be talking obviously about water risk and some of these other risks, which will increase costs, climate impacts, and then also not always updated around what are the actual costs and financial potential of solar. So I think there's a real opportunity to update the ways that we're assessing these deals.
I think you've highlighted quite a few of the sort of the nuts and bolts problems that you face when you're trying to actually get projects on the ground. And this difference between what is economic viability and corporate profitability is something that's really interesting, and we should perhaps unpack that a little bit more. Thomas, let me turn to you. Again, just on that point about corporate profitability, can you tell us what are the technologies that Hyliion has been developing and commercializing for sustainable, low-carbon solutions? I mean, I think you began with the transport sector, but you've expanded well beyond. So what I'm interested in unpacking is, what's the new driver here? Is it the many end users of clean electricity, or which you see as an opportunity, or is there an opportunity to use energy as the sort of spearhead to trigger other types of innovations in transportation systems, in industrial systems, and so forth?
So Hyliion is producing micro power plant technology. So our vision is, just like a facility has an air conditioning unit sitting outside to produce AC, we also want facilities to have a generator outside that's producing power 24/7, but on a micro scale and producing the power that that facility needs. So we often get asked the question of like, well, why hasn't this been done before? Why don't facilities have their own power plant just like they have their own AC unit? And the reality is the technology hasn't existed up until now. So if you look back 200 years, very similar to the passenger car space, 200 years ago, we actually had electric cars. Electric cars came before gas cars, actually. And then everyone knows over the last couple hundred years, gas has been the primary use of transport. And it wasn't until we had a breakthrough like batteries that enabled us to be able to have electric vehicles. Same exact thing in the power generation space. So 200 years ago, we had steam engines, we had diesel engines, we had Stirling technology. Stirling was always thought to be the most efficient, the best way to produce power. The problem is it's extremely difficult to actually make that system. So fast forward to today, 200 years later, we've seen a breakthrough in manufacturing, we now have 3D printing or additive manufacturing, which is enabling us to take this 200-year-old technology and actually make it today. And so that's what Hyliion is doing. We're taking the best, latest and greatest in manufacturing, applying it to Stirling engines, and making a micro power plant. Now, to your question of, okay, who's going to adopt this? What does this enable? So we're seeing that there are some sectors that just need more power that the grid is not going to be able to provide. So think of data centers as by far number one. EV charging sites is coming right behind that. These locations where they go to their utility and the utility says, there's just not enough power available in order to bring you onto the grid and provide the power you need. So those are the locations that we see are first going to start making their own power on site. And then long term, our vision is if you can make electricity for cheaper and cleaner than you can source it from the grid, then why wouldn't hotels, hospitals, shopping centers, commercial buildings, why wouldn't they also move to just making their own power? And we move to a distributed grid model as opposed to what we have today, which is big power plants distributing power out.
Both you and Joanna have either explicitly or implicitly referred to regulation. And just hold that thought. I want to come back to both of you. Because is regulation then holding back this kind of more distributed, democratized energy system that we know technology can provide and yet often doesn't get deployed? But I'll come back to you. Laszlo, turning to the international, what we've been looking across the globe, you at Shell have been looking at various different scenarios which understand the impact of AI and digitalization on the energy system, on its evolution, and maybe the other way around as well, how not just the demand for energy, but how AI can then help optimize for the way energy is used. Tell us what you have identified, what are you understanding as clear trends, but also what are some of the unknowns that you would still like to unpack?
So in the Shell scenarios team, we follow the guidance of the great British economist Keynes, that when the facts change, I change my mind. We don't operate according to the fixed schedule, but we very much felt that the world has changed with the emergence of AI technology. And so we sat down to analyze and model, and we are going to publish it soon, of how AI is reshaping the world economy and the energy system. And our main conclusion is that it does lead to a significantly higher electricity consumption, but the big story is not the electricity consumption of the data centers. The big story is how a new general purpose technology is enhancing productivity growth. Because this excitement with AI, it presupposes that this time for real, that this is not like the blockchain hype 5 years ago or the metaverse hype 5 years ago. This is a genuinely new general purpose technology with comparable impacts to electricity 100 years ago. Now, different societies have different capabilities to take advantage of the new technologies. We actually identified India as one of the countries which is well positioned to enhance its development from digital technologies. And 200 million more Indian families in the middle class, that's where the big demand number comes from. So basically, the primary impact on the energy system is the way that it leads to increased prosperity. Now, the electricity consumption of data centers is a big story because the electricity system in North America and Europe had 15 years of stagnation. Before that, electricity was growing dynamically in Europe and the United States as well. In fact, if you look at the demand projections from 10, 15 years ago, US electricity demand is still surprisingly low rather than surprisingly high. And if I take, there are 100 different projections on the AI-related electricity demand. With a bit of a summary, the current opinion converges towards, by 2030, Germany, and by 2050, another United States emerging. Now that is meaningful, but that's well within the capability of the industry to supply if the industry plays its cards right. Now, where things can go wrong, of course, multiple places. So one thing that we announced is that whether there is actually a societal acceptance of the new technology. And that differs from society to society, and that will be one of the big distinguishing factors. And also how society will want to use that, because let's not forget that both for digital technology and even for solar panels. I remember from my childhood growing up in communist Eastern Europe, the Soyuz Apollo spacecraft, it was the Soviet aircraft which had solar panels. Right? One of the early scientific breakthroughs in solar power were done by the Soviet space program. But they did not use this technology to enhance prosperity. They used this technology only for military purposes. And given that the world, that there is a frighteningly frequent discourse of a Cold War 2.0, there is also a possibility that the new digital technology is primarily channeled towards defense-related applications rather than towards growth and prosperity and clean energy. So that's also something to watch.
Well, I mean, all technology can be put to good or ugly purposes. That's where, I guess, governance and human agency comes in. But if I may just push you provocatively, you said AI has the potential, because it's a general purpose technology, therefore it has the potential to significantly enhance productivity. And yet, the energy demand surge is a real one. Would you say, you know, when we say one ChatGPT search consumes 10x more electricity than a simple Google search, is that something we should be worried about at all? Or, as you say, the market is ready enough to deliver?
So our analysis suggests that there are two factors in play.
Okay.
One is the energy consumption increase triggered by the new technologies. And the second is how digital technology can accelerate innovation and how it can lead to a more efficient energy system operation. And unfortunately, it usually takes a decade or 1.5 decades for new energy technologies to reach a critical mass, even after the technology maturation happened. Don't forget that we regard solar as the sudden and surprising game changer. Actually, Albert Einstein got his Nobel Prize for the photovoltaic effect 100 years ago. The first functioning solar panels were designed in the Bell Labs in 1957. So solar had several decades before it broke through as a revolutionary technology. So our analysis suggests that up until around 2040, the energy demand impact is stronger. So compared to the pre-AI scenarios, we do see a higher fossil fuel demand, primarily higher natural gas demand, because it is natural gas which plays a unique role in power generation. But then, so natural gas demand grows more rapidly until 2040, but then it declines more rapidly. Because after 1.5 decades, the innovation and the new technologies reach a critical mass, and 2040 onward, it leads to a more rapid and more radical energy transition.
So, in a way, we are seeing two things then, Laszlo. One is that, as Joanna said, we have, at least on paper, clean energy makes sense, and yet what you're indicating is there is also a maturation period, not just clean energy, but all related technologies, which will result in a tipping point, right, in the deployment and adoption. Now, Carl, if I could turn to you, we're talking about energy, but other resources also matter. Land matters. You've been tracking the water cycle and the linkages between water and food and energy for a long time. Are some of those other constraints going to delay the tipping point, the rapid adoption of the technologies that Laszlo is referring to?
So I think we're living, how many people feel like we're living in a profound moment where I'm a storyteller, right? So to get on the ground, figure out who's doing what, well, what, where, this is a drama. And when we look at these issues, and we're looking at energy, we're looking at AI, we are facing, as you said, we have to play the cards right. This is an inflection point. Every choice we make, every choice, every search we make here today and in the future is actually defining our future. Every search we make consumes water, right? Because how do we generate the energy, first off, to power the data centers? Well, today it's usually hydro, it's coal still, it's maybe natural gas. A lot of those power plants are cooled by water, right? So how do we actually generate the power? What's the other elephant in the room that has become very visible recently is how do you cool those data centers? So each search, when we say has a water footprint, that's water that's consumed. Most of the data centers use evaporative cooling. So when you're searching using ChatGPT, you're pulling water sometimes out of the ground, out of the river, and pushing it up into the sky. You're consuming that water. So as this story unfolds, we have a good and bad story to tell. How do we define that story? Now, you mentioned the nexus. That's a word I hope you take out of here if there's one word. The nexus of water, food, and energy in the changing climate. This is a system, and we have a choice of making this a positive system feedback loop or a negative one. How do we use our water? How do we apply our water budget to grow our food, to transport it, and then also how are we using our water to run our data? Now, the other side is we have the opportunity, which you're using AI to optimize the systems, we have an opportunity of optimizing our water systems. Mexico City, which could face a day zero moment when the taps either run dry or you might not have water on Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, you might have maybe one day a week. Mexico City loses 40% of its water through leaky pipes. Okay, so that's a huge infrastructure problem. How do we fix that? Well, we can use AI to listen better. Microsoft believes that they can solve, they say 20% of those leaks using AI to pinpoint where the leaks are and use the water more efficiently. One more last little piece here. So anybody here from California? So of course we see the water impact there, but just looking back at some statistics, California uses about 20% of its electricity to move and treat water.
Yep.
So when we're thinking about electricity generation, we have to think about these kind of feedback loops. And so the positive feedback loop, when we save energy, we save water. We also have more water for agriculture. So we can listen better, we can course correct faster, but we really have to, this is the era of systems change, and it's our choice to, is it a positive system change or a negative? It's the feedback loop.
This is exactly the segue I needed for Joanna, because Carl is referring to not system change in the singular, but a systems change in the plural. There's a systems change needed in energy, but also how we look at water, how we look at land. So Joanna, again, you talked about subsidies, for instance, reforming subsidies. You talked about permitting, you talked about regulation. And we could say that we have those problems just within energy. And then we have those problems just within the food system, and then just within the water system. How do we break the logjam across these silos before we even start thinking about the positive ways in which we can rebuild the system?
I mean, that's the question of the day. And it's obviously different in every geography, where each country has its own regulatory and permitting process. But I think that the thing to consider is indeed, when you look at where are coal plants built, right now a significant number are built in water-stressed areas and are using this. So the transition in those places to renewables creates a real win-win in terms of ability to have water. Then you think about siting. Many of the huge conflicts related to renewable energy deployment have to do with land siting. Again, we're looking at positive benefits. If you look at already degraded land or already used land from coal or other extractive industries, you can think about a transition which is much more viable than simply looking at one individual renewable energy plant or transition of one fossil fuel asset. So I do think if we look at this in the round, we're able to find more win-win situations. And I do also think that we are facing a time when we're going to be making choices between water for land, water and land for energy, for food, for people, for biodiversity. These are difficult choices that we're making, but if we look at this carefully in the round, we can choose, particularly there's a lot of low-hanging fruit or iconic zones or green zones where we can start. It may not be where we go all the way, but we can start. And India has many of these, and your work has pointed these out. And I highly recommend that everybody read the articles and research papers that CEEW has put out and that they're about to put out about this intersection of how you can actually, when you look at it, the work that is so exciting because it takes it from this high level, yes, we can do it, to an actual, in this geography, here is where we should be retiring these assets, building these assets, deploying water here and there, and then we can figure out the regulatory and policy asks. That also relates then to the financing, because once those costs are integrated, it actually makes the renewables more attractive, it makes fossil fuels less attractive, and also it gives investors the certainty that they need to be able to make those kinds of longer term investments. So there really is a positive scenario if we can come together on this.
Again, Joanna, you referred to this, but Thomas, in what you were describing earlier, your technologies, there's one theme that's emerging, which is the potential to have more bespoke technological solutions that are deployed rather than a one-size-fits-all story, right? And you've taken an old technology and redeployed it in a way that allows you to kind of look at manufacturing a different way, the use of micropower plants, et cetera. So let's come back to this issue of, say, the rising demand for AI, right, or other digital technologies. That requires on-site clean power solutions, whether it's for data centers or anything else. How can your technologies and your innovations help to ensure that the energy system within those closed spaces are more optimally designed and optimally used? And how could that then help to link up with other systems? Say you could be running data centers more efficiently, but also then does AI help you to manage the water system and the food system in a neighboring geography? Are these ways in which you're thinking about the potential use cases for your technology?
Yeah, so I think AI as a whole is going to make everything smarter, right? And one of the questions that's often come up is, well, will AI itself solve this energy crisis that we're facing, the efficiencies that it's going to be able to unlock, or is AI going to just consume so much more that our amount of energy we're going to consume will go up? I firmly believe we are just starting to scratch the surface on the opportunities that AI is going to unlock, and I think the hyperscalers are seeing this as well, right? We work with many of the hyperscalers. One of them said to us, right now they consume 6 gigawatts of electricity. Their plan is in 5 years they want to be consuming 40 gigawatts of electricity. And so to put that into perspective, that is taking all the energy that London consumes, 10xing it, and that's the amount of increase of power that one hyperscaler is planning to add in 5 years, right? And like AI, it's just unbelievable the unlocks it's able to produce. So it's just a fun story on it. There's a startup company that they took one of those Boston Dynamic dog robots, right? And they said, well, Boston Dynamics has spent 20 years hard programming this to figure out how to control it. What if we had AI watch 10,000 hours of videos of dogs running around on different terrains, whatever you can find on YouTube? Can we make a dog that's actually better than 20 years of programming? And they did that, a couple of months of watching videos. They put the dogs head to head on an obstacle course, and they purposely tricked it where it was climbing upstairs and then one of the steps fell out. As soon as the AI or the pre-programmed dog, the Boston Dynamics dog, hit that step, it was stuck, right? It didn't know what to do. The AI dog started flailing its paw like a dog would normally do, caught the step ahead of it, and started climbing up the rest of the steps. And so you've got this tool that you take one of the best robotics companies in the world, spent 20 years developing something, AI can beat it in a few months of watching videos. So that's where I say, like, the amount of power that we're about to go into needing is astronomical. I probably lean more on the I agree there is going to be a tipping point. I think it will continue to be further and further out, just because it is easier to make power using fossil fuels as opposed to renewables. Even though we are going to adopt renewables, I think we're going to adopt a lot more kind of using natural gas, using hydrogen, those types of solutions.
But Laszlo, you need to come in here because, well, you said earlier that technology, there's a choice that's before us on how we deploy the technology, right? And in a way, Thomas is saying there's also a choice of how we train the technology, right? And when you bring the two together, how do we leapfrog to that more sustainable systems approach?
So a couple of things. One is that in the past 50 years, the the energy efficiency of computing, so the amount of electricity used for a mathematical problem, improved by a factor of 10 at the power of 13. So that's 1 and 13 zeros times improvement in the energy efficiency of computing. And almost certainly there will be very, very strong efforts to continue this efficiency. Now, what will be the speed of the efficiency improvement of computing? That remains to be seen. But without this astonishing, I mean, today, if you have an iPhone charger, I mean, your iPhone charger has a little chip in it, which regulates the power flow through the inverter. Now, that chip in your iPhone charger has more computing power than the onboard computer of the Apollo spacecrafts. Okay, so this was the technological improvement in digital technology. As it continues, I think that now the tech industry has a lot of responsibility, but my impression is that they are aware of this responsibility and they are working very hard to improve the efficiency there. Now, the other thing about you mentioned is this bespoke engineering. We actually think that some of the most important game changers that are unfolding are actually modular technologies.
Right.
So solar is a modular technology, and it can be, both the manufacturing scale-up can be incredibly rapid. I mean, pre-COVID, China manufactured around 100 gigawatt solar panels per year. The last month was 65 gigawatt in 1 month. So that's like 700 gigawatt. And that was like a 5 years increase. The same for batteries. Some of the most interesting innovations, like nuclear, some of the most promising nuclear innovation is taking processes where the underlying nuclear physics has been well understood from Cold War weapons research, but trying to apply modern digital technology and imagine that in a modular fashion. And I can tell that Shell's own R&D team is working on a modular carbon capture and storage facility, which will be mounted in containers, because current approaches are this heavy bespoke chemical engineering. Now, so these modular technologies can be ramped up. Now, one big thing to watch is that so far, the overwhelming majority of this ramp up of modular technologies took place in China. Now, it is possible to rely on large-scale imports of Chinese equipment, but there might be political question marks. It is possible to replicate those manufacturing facilities. You can have India, you can have Mexico, you can have other countries coming in. Unavoidably, that takes time. And currently, there is a gold rush for AI. No tech company is prepared to wait. And that will pull in a significant quantities of natural gas, absolutely. And that will change the trajectory in the 1 to 2 decade time horizon.
So this is, I mean, Carl, you earlier said this is a drama, but you didn't actually expand on what's the drama. But I'm certainly seeing a drama here. Because on one hand, there's what you and Joanna are referring to, the here and now of getting the energy governance right, but also the other natural ecosystems right. And what Thomas and Laszlo are also saying, that there are other technological disruptions that are also underway. That's not going to slow down because we've not fixed these other legacy problems. So what's the governance fix for this?
So you teased me up perfectly on that, too. So I'm going to say, one is, how do we define technology? So I'm going to propose we need a new operating system. Okay. You can count that as technology, right? So I'm going to propose that we truly need to create some feedback loops that provide the course correction, because as Joanna said, one of the biggest impediments here is policy, regulation, incentives. So how do we fix policy? Because it's out of sync with the times, right? So we have future, how do we see ourselves? How do we set the policy up for the future? But then right now, we're not internalizing, we're not changing fast enough. We have policies that are entirely out of sync with the financial needs that we need to address our big infrastructure issues. But then we also have the ability to listen to ourselves better and course correct. So think of technology as a radar system, not as a one-way street, but as a ping, as a call and response. So we can monitor our situational awareness, but then we also have to use the technology to listen better to ourselves and our leaders and tell our story better so they see themselves in the picture. Then we need to use technology to convene and co-convene faster with humility so that, again, we can look to the future and that we can actually course correct in real time. Because this isn't a story about today or next year, it's a story about bridging between the two. And right now, they tend to be siloed, and they tend to be responsive, we're dealing in the crisis moment, and they tend to be forward-looking in the future.
I wonder, before we turn to the audience, I wonder if, instead of training technology, we can train governance.
Yes.
Unlike the Boston Dynamics dog that was untrained on AI, and you spend decades learning and relearning and unlearning. Can we do the same for governance? Or can we do citing and inclusion and social stability, etc., with this new operating system?
And let me add one more thing.
There are actually
Trust.
AI tools which read the documents of public hearings that help with the permitting bureaucracy.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
absolutely.
Better way of public consultation.
Right.
Joanna, I'm going to come back to you in a bit after you've taken, but one thing we've not talked about, you briefly touched on financing, but I also want to talk about catalytic financing. Can philanthropy, since you come from that world, can philanthropy nudge us to bridge this present and the future that Carl is referring to? But we have about 10 minutes. I think we've got an exciting set of themes that have been introduced into the conversation. Would anyone like to offer a brief comment or a question? Yes, please. There's a microphone for you, and if you could quickly introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, thank you. That was really great. My name's Nikki Hutley. I'm an economist from Australia, do a lot of very different things, including working with the Climate Council there. One of our primary concerns is obviously the transition and emissions reduction. And what you're all saying fills me with quite dread, to be honest, because you're saying we're going to consume so much energy through AI and we can't roll out the RE quickly enough, and we're going to increase gas. So am I correct in thinking what you're saying is that the emissions profile that we're currently assuming is actually undercooked and things are going to get a lot worse, certainly to 2040, before they get better? Is that...
Okay. So Laszlo, you said this, but I'd like Thomas also to respond to this. Is gas the only way to meet that demand?
So the quick answer to that is that we currently, 2 years ago, we decided to no longer publish a no overshoot 1.5 scenario because frankly we just don't see a plausible. I can put together a spreadsheet where the numbers add up, but there's absolutely no political and social plausibility to that. Now, compared to what 2 years ago when AI was much lower on the horizon, compared to what I 2 years ago I considered to be the most likely and most politically plausible trajectory, what we currently have in a surge type scenario is higher fossil fuel use until 2040, but cumulative emissions until the end of the century are actually significantly lower. And we ended up, when we run the numbers, we ended up actually around a 2 degrees climate impact without any additional optimistic assumptions on climate politics. Because indeed you have a 2-decade when the demand impact pulls in fossil fuels, primarily natural gas, but then all the innovation in material science for new batteries, in modular technologies, in reimagining old technologies like you did with modern digital technologies, it just all...
Okay, in the interest of time, let me ask Thomas to weigh in quickly before we take another comment or question.
So the feedback we're hearing is, even though these companies have climate pledges, 2040, they're going to get to net zero, the direct feedback is it's the gold rush right now of AI, and we are not going to lose this AI race due to our climate pledges, is the feedback. So with that, are they going out and saying, let's go fire up a bunch of coal-fired power plants? No, right? I think what we're hearing is wanting to be able to get a solution now that can also bridge into a longer-term solution. So can we have fuel-agnostic solutions that could run on natural gas today, but can maybe use ammonia in the future when that becomes available, or other cleaner fuels? That's the demand, but they're not going to lose the gold rush right now.
So, I mean, even though I'm the moderator, if I could offer a response from my side as well and make myself a panelist for a few seconds. I think, although we've been talking about AI, but there'll be many other drivers of energy demand as well. And I think there are other ways to respond to this. I mean, some work that we'll be publishing looks at a high energy demand scenario in a high growth economy like India. And we see that optimized at the distribution transformer level, like right down to the hyperlocal level, the world's fourth largest electricity system can actually inject even more renewables to manage the high growth in energy demand than what our intuitions might suggest, that let's use fossil to kind of balance this load. So I think, again, we need to play with these alternative scenarios. I'm not saying one scenario is right and the other is wrong, but I think it will matter what's driving the growth. Is it AI, or is it cooling in a hot country? Is it transportation systems? And is there a better way to optimize for this?
I have to come in on,
Yes,
on
please,
this as
please,
well, because
yeah.
I've also been hearing this week a lot of the narrative that increased energy use is inevitable and therefore we have to continue to use fossil fuels. And I do have to push back on the inevitability narrative, because we are seeing scenarios in which renewable energy can be transformatively larger. And so I think we do need to make sure that we are looking at those scenarios. We're seeing revolutions in places like Pakistan, the distributed energy systems that we're looking at. And I also think that there are incredible opportunities to finance and scale this. Plus, we are seeing the climate impacts today at a scale that we had not expected. And so when we're looking at a business model between now and 2040, looking at the potential climate impacts on existing fossil fuel infrastructure and the viability, making sure that those risks are included in the scenarios is critical. So I just do need to make sure that we're questioning the inevitability statement, please. Although I do agree that electricity demand will be surging.
Let's take another question.
Hi, my name is Alice Charles, and I work for a multinational design engineering firm called Arup. And I'm not going to breach any non-disclosure agreements that we have with many technology companies that in terms of being the designer of major data centers around the world. But I'll broadly tell you what I'm seeing. I'm seeing a technology sector that can apply some solutions right now and are choosing not to because regulators are not asking for them. Water was mentioned earlier. We can totally solve for the water problem. There's alternatives. We can also totally embrace district heating if it's not been, district heating and cooling, if it's not been asked for, it's not being done. Also, we can protect nature to a greater extent. If it's not been asked for, it's not being done. We are also seeing the technology companies buying up renewable facilities, whether it's wind, whether it's solar, so that investment that countries made in enabling those facilities to be developed is now being eaten up by many of these technology companies to meet their demand. I think what we will see in the short term is incremental solutions, but certainly in terms of talking to the technology companies, where they're thinking about, as we move towards 2035, is the space where they're going to utilize nuclear fusion and where they're going to, backed up by hydrogen, but they're also thinking about the development of these facilities in clusters combined with industrial corridors. I think one of the things that we should, just to finalize what I'm saying, is their Scope 3 emissions are gone off the charts. And we also need to think about the usefulness of AI that we're utilizing. And that was a conversation that I seen in another part of Davos today. And I'll give you an example.
I think we're because I want to take one last comment, and we have less than a minute left.
I'll give you one final example. One of the largest data centers is actually quite near to where I live in Dublin, and my company was the engineers. And there was the Stormy Daniels issue in the United States, and it brought down the energy of most of Greater Dublin because of that data center. That data center had a backup, but that entire community was left without electricity for a number of hours.
Right.
So we need to ask ourselves, do we need what we're creating?
All right, I think you made the case for pushing harder. Let's take one last comment there and come back to the panelists for final comments.
Hello, Rika Nakazawa, Chief Commercial Innovation at NTT. We're investing quite a bit around the whole space integrated computing network, which translates to space and satellite innovation. I'm curious what your thoughts are about data centers in space.
All right. So, given that we have only 1 minute left, let's go celestial on this. pick one or the other of these comments if you want to make or is there a burning final thought you want to offer? Let's go in the other direction.
Other direction,
Start with
okay.
Carl.
So really
very short, 30 seconds.
Three things, I think. I think we need to use technology to rebuild trust, and also it's the trust and the accountability, and test our assumptions, because we keep making there's plenty of water, we'll build here. Or we can handle searches. So we need to test our assumption. What are we using the technology for? And then we need to come back to how do we build the leadership that's going to take us forward? Because unless we have that, we'll be status quo.
Trust and leadership. I'm not sure if AI is going to deliver that to us. We've got to find another way of bringing that about.
So currently, so what we see currently, and this is not my endorsement, but what we observe, is that the political willingness to intentionally constrain AI is very weak in Europe and completely non-existent elsewhere. Elsewhere, it's a gold rush. Do renewables have an ability to scale up as fast as the digital technology? I think the answer is yes, if there is a coordinated top-down policy facilitating it. But currently, I don't have to convince you, I think, after the political events, that currently policy is lagging behind the technological developments. And hence the conclusion that if this asymmetry persists, then pulling in a significant amount of natural gas will happen.
Sure. Thomas, 30 seconds.
Yeah, so I think I've been clear with this. I think there's going to be a lot more power consumption coming, specifically from data centers. On-site is really the only way that it's going to work. You know, locally at the facility, the grid doesn't have the capacity today. And then the data center providers want as clean of a solution that they can get. I think right now that does point towards more of a natural gas type of a solution, but hopefully ones that can then evolve into cleaner fuels as we go forward.
Okay. Joanna?
So I think my message would be massively scaling renewables, particularly tripling at least, working together with companies to identify where is the need, and then also where can we use maximization of land, water, and grid to enable that meeting of the need plus the scaling of renewables and connecting with financiers in a collective approach. Even if it, obviously better if it's regulatory and policy oriented, but even informally, I think we can have a more collective approach to enable those targets.
As I close out, I mean, just reflecting on the themes that have come up, I mean, one core message that I'm taking away is that on this nexus, the word nexus that Carl just referred to, we already knew it's complex. Energy needed for water, water needed for energy, land needed for both, is getting more complicated with the gold rush for AI and digital technologies, but it'll also get compounded by climate shocks. I mean, we still live on one single planet, you know, so we cannot divorce ourselves from what's unfolding, which is why I think this point about pushing back on the inevitability is an important one. The second theme that's emerged a lot, both in terms of existing technology or future ones, is you've got to get comfortable with discontinuity and disruption. You know, the kind of a linear chain of technology will develop, it'll take decades to learn, then decades to deploy, and we can see potential to disrupt that linearity as long as we get comfortable with non-linearity. And the third thing that's emerging is there's a lot of potential in decentralization rather than centralized energy systems, centralized water systems, centralized food systems, et cetera. And the more we decentralize, the more we can get more bespoke. You know, in my free time, I ride horses. And I see two horses galloping here. One is the clean tech revolution. The other is the digital AI revolution. And right now, they seem to be pulling in different directions. Question before all of us is, as we reflect, can one horse pull the other horse along better and faster in a common direction? Thank you for coming together, but please put your hands together to applaud Joanna Messing, Thomas Healy, Lars Navarro, and Carl Ganter. Thank you very much.